His wife and best friends shoved him off the yacht, thinking he drowned. But 6 days earlier, he'd overheard everything and started planning a comeback that would make them wish he had died. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a masterclass in survival, deception, and justice. What would you do if the people you loved most plotted your murder? Adrian Walker had never planned to come home early, but today he wanted to surprise his son Ryan. He'd flown in from a week-long business trip in New York, carrying a small, carefully wrapped gift, a model ship, handcrafted from fine oak, something he knew Ryan would cherish. The thought of seeing his boy's eyes light up made him smile, oblivious to the storm waiting at home. The Seattle mansion was silent as he parked and stepped inside. Too quiet. He called out for Valerie and Ryan, but only his own echo answered. His steps carried him toward the staircase, then froze when a voice floated down from above. It was Valerie, calm, controlled, but the words were sharp, cold. "We'll finish this next week," she said into her phone. "The three of us, finally complete." Adrian stopped, his heart skipping a beat. Something was wrong. The gift shook in his hands. Who was she talking about? And what did she mean by complete? He stayed in the shadows listening. Every syllable cut through him like glass. "I'll get him to celebrate our anniversary on the yacht. You'll be there, just like always." And then, he's gone. A chill ran down his spine. His wife? Plotting his death? And with Jake, his best friend since college, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding, who had promised loyalty over a lifetime. The betrayal was unimaginable. Adrian's mind raced. He had always believed in trust, in the bonds of family and friendship. But now he knew those bonds were lies. The life he had built, his empire, his family, his future, was being dismantled from within. The phone conversation ended. Valerie's voice faded, replaced by the distant sound of traffic outside. Adrian exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. Panic would not help him. Rage would only make him predictable. He had seconds to choose his path. When Valerie appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling as if nothing had happened, Adrian returned her greeting with the same warmth he had shown for years. He kissed her cheek, asked about Ryan, listened as she told him his son was at soccer practice, picked up by Jake. Every word was a lie, every gesture a mask, but Adrian had learned something crucial in that hallway. He was a better actor than they had ever imagined. "Looking forward to our anniversary," he said casually. "Just the three of us on the yacht, like always." "Just like always," Valerie echoed, her smile bright but her eyes flickering. Adrian's thoughts turned to the yacht. Ocean currents, water temperature, the isolation of Puget Sound. He thought about how far from shore they'd be, how carefully they had planned it. He considered every detail of their murder plot, calculating risk, timing, and variables. And then slowly, a plan began to form. That night, while Valerie slept, Adrian stared at the ceiling, feeling the old version of himself, the trusting husband, the devoted father, fade away. In its place was something new, a man who understood that survival often required patience, precision, and deception. He wasn't just going to confront betrayal, he was going to turn it into his advantage. At 3 in the morning, he slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Valerie. In the office, he accessed the security system he had installed years ago, a system so sophisticated that even a whisper could be recorded. There it was, the conversation in digital clarity, every word preserved. He copied it, encrypted it, stored it in multiple locations. Then came the question he had feared. Ryan. Adrian had always trusted the boy to be his son, but a suspicion gnawed at him. He retrieved a DNA testing kit, quietly took a sample from Ryan's toothbrush, and sent it to a discreet lab. In his heart, he hoped he was wrong, but deep down, he feared the truth. By dawn, Adrian had mapped out the resources he would need. Lieutenant Commander Avery Holt of the Coast Guard, a man whose career Adrian had saved years ago, would be discreetly stationed for a routine exercise. Dr. Sarah Joe, head of his private medical response team, would be ready for emergencies. And Sloan Beckett, his attorney, would be prepared to turn digital evidence into legal power when the time came. Valerie emerged later that morning, cheerful and oblivious, and Adrian played the role of the loving husband perfectly. He smiled, laughed, and acted as if nothing had happened. Each moment reinforced their blind confidence. They had underestimated him, and that would be their undoing. Adrian drove to a marine supply store purchasing specialized equipment for the yacht trip, an ultra-thin, inflatable life vest designed to remain invisible under formal clothing. It was light, unobtrusive, and could save his life if they went through with their plan. By evening, he returned home and sat alone, piecing together everything he had learned. Every memory, every gesture, every word of affection, poison if taken at face value, but now tools in his hands. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was preparing for resurrection. The yacht awaited. The anniversary was 6 days away. And Adrian Walker, billionaire, father, and betrayed husband, had transformed. The old man who trusted blindly was gone. In his place stood someone patient, calculating, and prepared to reclaim his life in ways Valerie and Jake could never imagine. Adrian Walker woke the next morning with a single thought: evidence. Every detail of Valerie and Jake's plot had to be documented, preserved, and leveraged. He reviewed the security footage again, noting every nuance, the way Valerie's voice softened when she mentioned family of three, the casual familiarity with which Jake had agreed. This was more than betrayal. It was meticulous premeditation. He couldn't afford to act on emotion. Precision would be his weapon. First, the DNA results. Adrian had sent Ryan's sample to a private lab under a false name. 48 hours would decide whether the boy he had loved for 8 years was truly his. Adrian avoided looking at the boy, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't yet reconcile affection with the truth he feared. He had to prepare for both outcomes, one for his heart, one for strategy. While Valerie and Jake planned their weekend murder, Adrian prepared his own defenses. He contacted Avery Holt, his trusted Coast Guard ally. "I need a favor," he said, voice calm. "Saturday night, Puget Sound, a rescue operation that looks routine but is ready for anything. No questions, no delays." Holt didn't ask. He had learned long ago not to question Adrian's precision, not to underestimate the man who had saved his career years earlier. Next, Adrian spoke with Dr. Sarah Jo and her team. "I need off-the-books medical support," he said. "Hypothermia treatment, emergency extraction, rapid response. I can't explain why, but I trust you to be ready." They nodded, professional and discreet. Adrian had spent years building relationships with people who understood loyalty and discretion. Now that network would save his life. Sloan Beckett, his attorney, received the final briefing. Adrian handed her encrypted files containing the recorded plot, correspondence, and any proof of conspiracy. "Wait for my word. The boardroom comes first, the law comes second." Sloan understood immediately. This was not a legal strategy. It was a staged revelation, carefully orchestrated for maximum impact. Adrian's phone buzzed with Valerie's latest message. "Can't wait for Saturday, darling. Ryan and I are so excited." He read it silently, deleting it without response. The boy was Jake's, yes, but Adrian's love for him remained undiminished. The revelation was painful, but it did not weaken him. Love would not cloud his judgment. It would fuel it. Days passed like a precise countdown. Adrian mapped the yacht, memorized the rails, measured distances from the water to every deck surface. He tested the equipment he had purchased. The ultra-thin life vest could inflate instantly without detection. He calculated water temperature, current speed, and the likelihood of anyone noticing a struggle. Every variable had a contingency. Every risk had a countermeasure. Meanwhile, Valerie continued her rehearsed normalcy. She laughed at dinner, joked with Ryan, and flirted casually with Jake in front of the boy. Adrian observed silently, noting the micro-expressions, the brief flicker of guilt when their eyes met, the subtle tension in Jake's hands. They were confident in their plan, blind to the fact that he knew everything. Thursday night, the DNA results arrived. Adrian opened the encrypted email, heart-heavy, and read the 7 words that would forever alter his life. 0% paternal match. Ryan was not his son. 8 years of bedtime stories, soccer practices, birthday parties, an illusion. But he did not collapse. He did not panic. He accepted the truth and folded it into his plan. Ryan's place in his life would remain, but the betrayal required justice. Adrian spent Friday preparing for contingencies. He rehearsed interactions with Valerie and Jake, ensuring he could maintain the illusion of ignorance until the precise moment. He checked every camera, every recorder, every signal. Holt and his team were ready. Sarah Joe's paramedics were strategically positioned, silent and invisible. Sloan Beckett had legal safeguards on standby, ready to transform evidence into immediate arrests. That evening, Adrian sat alone with Ryan, tucking him into bed. "Can you come with me on the yacht tomorrow?" the boy asked, excitement in his voice. Adrian smiled, tucking the blanket around him. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy." Ryan hugged him tight, and Adrian returned the embrace. DNA did not change the love he felt. It only sharpened the need for calculated action. Adrian's mind turned to strategy. He needed to let Valerie and Jake believe they were still in control. They had planned to remove him, but he would turn their scheme into their downfall. He considered how the Coast Guard could stage a rescue, how the paramedics could intervene at the exact moment, and how the boardroom could be prepared for the legal hammer to fall after their success. Every detail had to be flawless. The night before the anniversary, Adrian reviewed the yacht layout again. He memorized the angles, the blind spots, and the likely paths of attack. He fitted the vest under his jacket, testing its invisibility and functionality. The equipment was part of the plan, but his calm, composed demeanor would be the true weapon. Valerie and Jake believed him naive. They believed in a trusting husband. That illusion would give him the advantage he needed. He lay awake that night, not with fear, but with focus. Every memory of betrayal, every moment of love twisted into deceit, became a tool. By morning, he would step into the trap they had set for him, but on his terms. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly. He was the man who could survive the impossible and turn it into justice. The countdown was complete. Saturday morning arrived clear and cold. Adrian readied himself, double-checked signals with Holt, verified medical contingencies with Sarah Joe, and ensured Sloan had every legal safeguard in place. Everything was aligned. The stage was set, and Adrian Walker, betrayed, calculating, and resolute, was ready to step into the most dangerous and controlled confrontation of his life. Saturday afternoon, the yacht waited at the private dock. Its hull gleamed under the sun, the water calm, deceptive. Valerie and Jake moved with practiced ease, unaware that every gesture, every step, every conversation had been memorized by Adrian. He boarded last, smiling, carrying a bottle of champagne as if nothing had changed. "Ready for another anniversary cruise?" Jake said casually, adjusting the wheelhouse. Adrian nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." Valerie poured champagne for everyone, her movements precise, rehearsed. Adrian observed, noting subtle signs of tension, tiny cracks in their confidence, but he said nothing. He had to remain the unsuspecting husband, the loving father, until the precise moment. As the yacht pulled away from the dock, the Seattle skyline shrinking behind them, Adrian assessed distances, rail heights, and water currents. Every calculation from the past week clicked into place. They believed the plan was theirs. They thought control was absolute. That belief was his advantage. Dinner passed smoothly. Valerie laughed at Adrian's jokes, praised the food, and tried to engage Ryan in light conversation. Jake maintained a calm, affable presence, masking the anxiety Adrian knew must be underneath. The scene was perfect, but it was a trap, their trap, and he was fully prepared. Night fell, the water darkening around them. Adrian noticed the faint glow of a chase boat shadowed in the distance, positioned exactly where Holt had instructed. Invisible to Valerie and Jake, it was ready for the intervention he had orchestrated. Every contingency was in place. The vest, the paramedics, the Coast Guard, and the legal team standing by. Finally, the moment came. Valerie and Jake moved with coordination, pushing Adrian toward the rail. He let himself fall, the icy water slamming into him as planned. The life vest inflated immediately, keeping him submerged just beneath the surface. He allowed himself to be drowned while the yacht engines roared and panic played across their faces. Above, Valerie screamed. Jake called out, their act of triumph complete, or so they thought. Adrian's fingers brushed the hull, adjusting for balance, staying just below detection. Within seconds, strong hands from the chase boat pulled him from the water. Paramedics worked swiftly, wrapping him in thermal blankets, giving the appearance of a miraculous rescue. The yacht's crew and the two perpetrators thought he had been overwhelmed by the cold. Valerie's screams turned to tears, her composure crumbling. Jake's body tensed, confusion and fear replacing arrogance. Adrian allowed them to believe the worst, every detail carefully calibrated. 3 days later, Adrian returned, not as a survivor but as a ghost. Across the street from the cathedral where his own funeral was held, he watched the mourners, business associates, and family pay tribute to a man they believed lost at sea. Valerie and Jake performed their roles perfectly, convincing the public of their innocence in his death. But Adrian saw everything clearly. Their relief was their weakness. At Kingsley Harbor headquarters, Valerie moved quickly, calling an emergency board meeting to assert her authority as interim CEO. Jake positioned himself as chairman, ready to consolidate control. The executives hesitated, sensing something amiss, but Valerie and Jake's confidence was intoxicating. Adrian made his move. He entered the boardroom quietly, unnoticed until the last second. 12 executives froze. Two conspirators, standing confidently, suddenly faced the man they had tried to kill. Adrian placed a small digital recorder on the table, pressed play, and Valerie's voice filled the room. "We'll finish this next week. He won't see it coming." Shock rippled through the board. Executives leaned back, unable to reconcile the words with the man sitting calmly at the head of the table. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence, combined with the recording, was enough. Sloan Beckett entered with two detectives. Handcuffs glinted under the conference room lights. Valerie's expression turned from shock to panic. Jake's mouth opened, but no sound came. Adrian's calm, precise demeanor left no room for argument. "You thought you controlled the narrative," Adrian said quietly, addressing both. "You thought I would die quietly. You miscalculated." He slid a white envelope across the table. "And this is the final piece." He revealed the DNA results. Ryan was not his son. The betrayal was layered, as husband, as father, and as CEO. Valerie's knees buckled under the weight of exposure. Jake's hands shook. The detectives moved swiftly, securing the two conspirators. Adrian remained seated, composed, letting the gravity of his survival and their exposure settle over the room. The climax of betrayal and preparation concluded in silence. Adrian had survived not by chance, but through calculation. He had turned their plot into evidence, their confidence into failure, and their treachery into a spectacle of accountability. Every step, every measure had been anticipated. The boardroom was no longer theirs. It was a stage for justice. Adrian stood alone for a moment, letting the weight of the operation sink in. They had thought to remove him, but in doing so, they had revealed everything. The climactic confrontation was over, and the first wave of consequences had struck. The next phase, the moral resolution, the reclaiming of life, and the safeguarding of Ryan, was ready to unfold. The arrests were swift. Valerie and Jake were escorted out of the boardroom in handcuffs, their schemes collapsing in real time. Adrian Walker remained behind, watching as their masks fell, their authority evaporated. Silence filled the room, broken only by the quiet shuffle of detectives and the occasional gasp from board members still trying to process the betrayal. Adrian didn't speak at first. He let the moment linger, the weight of what had just occurred settling over everyone present. 12 years of corporate maneuvering, friendships, and assumed loyalties had been tested, and now the two people he had trusted most were exposed as conspirators. The lesson was clear. Trust was fragile, loyalty rare, and betrayal costly. Sloan Beckett, his attorney, stepped forward. "Everything you see here is documented and recorded," she said. "From the yacht plot to the DNA results, every action has legal weight. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, all charges have been filed. The board is secure and the company remains under proper management." Adrian nodded, his mind already shifting to the next steps. Valerie and Jake's removal from the company was only part of the consequences. Adrian had to ensure Ryan's well-being. The boy, though biologically Jake's, had been raised with genuine love. Adrian had to make a choice that would protect him from the fallout, while ensuring he didn't reward betrayal. Later that afternoon, Adrian met with Ryan's grandmother. "I can't raise him," he said plainly, "but I won't abandon him. He needs stability, and I trust you to provide that." The grandmother nodded, understanding the complexity. Adrian's love for the boy remained, but he could not let the child live in a household shaped by the actions of traitors. Meanwhile, the media had caught wind of the arrests. Headlines splashed across Seattle news outlets. "Billionaire's wife and best friend arrested for plotting murder." The story spread rapidly, shaking both the public and business communities. Adrian watched the coverage with detachment, knowing the legal system would now run its course. He was no longer concerned with perception. His priority was justice, not sympathy. At Kingsley Harbor, the boardroom slowly emptied, leaving Adrian alone with the evidence and the realization of how close he had come to losing everything. He reviewed the digital files again, ensuring nothing was missing, nothing overlooked. Each conversation, every recorded move, and the DNA results were now tools of protection and leverage, guaranteeing that Valerie and Jake could never again threaten him or the company. Adrian reflected on his own survival. The planning, the coordination with Holt and Sarah Jo, the life vest, it had all worked perfectly. He had turned a plot of murder into a stage for justice, demonstrating patience and strategy over impulse and anger. The adrenaline of the yacht and the legal showdown had passed, replaced by calm, controlled authority. The fallout extended beyond the immediate arrests. Advisors, executives, and partners who had remained loyal or who had doubted Adrian now understood the depth of his foresight. Loyalty within the company was no longer just encouraged. It was demanded, reinforced by a demonstration that betrayal carried irreversible consequences. Adrian had sent a message, not just to Valerie and Jake, but to everyone in his professional and personal circles. Deceit would not be tolerated. Adrian also confronted the emotional toll. 8 years of believing Ryan was his son, 8 years of shared memories, celebrations, and quiet moments had been built on a lie. Yet Adrian separated love from betrayal. He had genuinely loved Ryan and had provided everything a father could offer. That love remained intact, even as he prepared to hand the boy to a safer guardian. It was a bittersweet victory. He had survived, but at a cost. As the day drew to a close, Adrian walked the edge of the harbor, looking at the calm water where the yacht had floated just days before. He remembered every calculation, every contingency that had ensured his survival. Valerie and Jake had believed they controlled the narrative. They had believed they could erase him from existence. Instead, he had reasserted control, turning a plot against him into a demonstration of precision and foresight. Adrian's world had shifted. The company was safe, the betrayers were in custody, and Ryan was protected. But he also understood that some wounds could not be undone. Trust once broken was not easily restored, and betrayal left scars deeper than physical harm. He had survived because of intelligence, planning, and restraint. Others might rely on impulse or emotion, but Adrian's strength came from preparation and patience. By nightfall, Adrian sat alone in his office, overlooking the harbor he had built from the ground up. The water shimmered faintly under the moonlight, indifferent to the human drama it had witnessed. He had survived the impossible, reclaimed his life, and ensured that justice had been served. The consequences for Valerie and Jake were immediate and severe. The consequences for Adrian were quieter, personal, and profound. He had been betrayed, attempted to be murdered, and manipulated, but he had acted with control, intelligence, and moral clarity. Survival had led to justice, and justice would ripple outward, reinforcing the lessons of trust, loyalty, and consequence. Adrian knew one thing with certainty. He had reclaimed his life. He had survived the betrayal, executed his plan flawlessly, and ensured that no one, no matter how close, could threaten him again. And while the aftermath would continue to unfold, legal proceedings, media coverage, and personal adjustments, he had turned a near-fatal situation into a triumph of strategy and moral reckoning. Weeks had passed since the arrests. Valerie and Jake faced the full weight of the law. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, All charges were proceeding through the courts. Adrian Walker, once targeted and betrayed, now watched from a distance with quiet satisfaction. The legal system would ensure they paid for their crimes, but the lesson he had learned went beyond statutes and fines. The company, Kingsley Harbor, stabilized quickly. Loyal executives who had remained discreet and cautious during the crisis stepped forward, reassured by Adrian's presence. Decisions that had once been overshadowed by fear were now guided by his authority. Every action reinforced a principle Adrian had established long before betrayal. Loyalty is rewarded, deceit is punished. His empire survived intact, stronger for the ordeal. Adrian faced the more complicated task of dealing with Ryan. Despite the shocking revelation of paternity, Adrian had spent 8 years forming a genuine bond with the boy. Love, he realized, could exist independently of biology. Yet he understood that keeping Ryan within the household of his betrayers would be unsafe. After careful consideration, Adrian arranged for Ryan to live with his maternal grandmother, ensuring stability, safety, and continued care. The boy's life would be protected, his well-being prioritized, without giving power to those who had once plotted murder. Adrian returned to his daily routine, but nothing felt the same. He was changed, hardened, yes, but also wiser. The betrayal had cut deep, yet it had forced him to embrace patience, strategic thinking, and moral clarity. He no longer equated love with trust. He had learned that loyalty must be observed, tested, and rewarded carefully. Media coverage chronicled Valerie and Jake's fall. Headlines detailed the arrests, the yacht incident, and the subsequent exposure of the murder plot. The public watched, fascinated by the billionaire who had survived a planned murder and returned to claim justice. Adrian refused interviews. He had no need to explain his actions. The results spoke for themselves. The narrative was clear. Betrayal would not succeed, and calculated integrity would prevail. Weeks later, Adrian convened the board to address the company's future. He spoke calmly but firmly, outlining measures to prevent internal threats, reinforcing transparency, and emphasizing accountability. Every word carried weight because he had lived through the consequences of failure firsthand. Loyalty and honesty, he told them, were not abstract principles. They were survival tools. Privately, Adrian reflected on the emotional cost of his journey. Ryan's biological connection to Jake was a bitter truth, yet the boy's love for him remained unchanged. Adrian had chosen restraint over revenge, ensuring that the child's innocence was preserved. That decision, he understood, was part of the moral victory. Justice for the betrayers did not necessitate cruelty toward the innocent. As spring arrived in Seattle, Adrian visited the harbor alone. The water, once a site of attempted murder, now symbolized clarity and control. He had faced betrayal, deception, and life-threatening danger, and emerged stronger. He had reclaimed authority over his life, protected his loved ones, and demonstrated that patience and strategy could outmaneuver even the most carefully planned treachery. Adrian also reflected on the lesson he had learned about trust. It was a currency more valuable than wealth or power, and once broken, it left wounds that could never fully heal. But trust could also be rebuilt, cautiously and deliberately, with people who had proven themselves over time. He had learned to value discernment over blind faith, observation over assumption, and action over emotion. In the end, justice was served. Valerie and Jake faced the consequences of their choices. Kingsley Harbor thrived under Adrian's leadership. Ryan remained safe, loved, and supported. Adrian had survived, not just physically, but morally and strategically. He had transformed betrayal into a lesson in vigilance, preparation, and ethical clarity. Adrian Walker understood one thing above all: survival was more than staying alive. It was reclaiming control, asserting justice, and safeguarding those who could not protect themselves. He had done all three. And while the scars of betrayal remained, they were marks of endurance, intelligence, and moral triumph. He looked out at the harbor, breathing in the crisp air, feeling a sense of quiet accomplishment. The city, the company, and the boy's future were secure. The betrayers were punished. And Adrian Walker, once targeted and betrayed, had risen, not through rage or vengeance, but through strategy, foresight, and unwavering resolve. Trust, he thought, may be expensive, but justice, when paired with patience and intelligence, was priceless.